What do you see as your responsibility as a medical influencer? How can our audiences really discern for themselves where there's information that's more accurate versus what is, fluff?
I love sharing that, hey, it's possible to have a life inside of medicine. It's possible to be dual physician household and still enjoy different aspects of life and the common pitfalls that come along with being a dual physician household. There's a whole world outside of medicine. Your job is to take care of people, but if you don't take care of yourself first, whatever that other aspect of your life, that should be as important, if not more important, than your job as a physician.
I became a better lawyer when I started to really pursue an identity that wasn't solely boxed in by my profession.
Hi, listeners. We are back with another fun episode of the Happy and Human podcast. Dinesh, how are you doing?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I am great. I can't believe we're already recording this right now after the 4th of July holiday in America. That's Independence Day for us. And it seems like the year is flying by.
It sure is. And speaking of flying by, it took me almost 2 years to get our guest, who's really special. He's an inspiration to me. He's been just crushing it all around the country, moving around, making things happen. It took 2 years to get his butt. I was going to say the ASS word, but it's a family-friendly show.
You're just going to spell it. So
yeah. To get him onto the show. So listeners, we want you to welcome Dr. Zain Hasan. He is an anesthesiologist with a passion for making medicine simple. If you are on YouTube or social media or anything, you will have seen his videos. He is just such an inspiration and one of the fittest doctors I know. Dr. Zain, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Seema. I've been waiting to get on here. I'm very sorry that I haven't been able to get on because of my crazy lifestyle, but thank you for having me on.
Oh, we're so excited. And everything that's meant to come to you always comes to you. It will always find you, listeners. I know that's, for me, something I get really impatient about. Like, when is it going to happen? Why hasn't it happened yet? And so I'm just grateful that Zain, you're here. And I know that this was divine timing and this episode is going to be even more impactful because we waited for what it felt right.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a little bit of info and, I'll confess, to prepare for this episode, I grabbed a bunch of links and I told AI to research Dr. Zain Hasan, and I fully expected it would come back and say, I don't know anything about this guy. But it came back with pages and pages and pages of information about what you've talked on, what you stand for, your principles on fatherhood. And, your bio is that you're an anesthesiologist. You're from Baltimore, right? You're a Baltimore Ravens fan. You're married to a physician. You've got a son, and you make medical inspired content. But before we get to that, I think that description fits a lot of people these days who are on social media. Share with our listeners about who you really are. What is the non-Googleable information that you can share with our listeners for them to really get behind the screen here or get behind the image that we all have in sort of in a public persona to really understand who you are and why this episode is going to be so impactful and powerful for them?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me on. This is a little bit different now that I've started to kind of get into the podcast arena where I get to interview other guests. I love this idea of kind of explaining and setting the basis for who I am. So I'm a physician by training and an anesthesiologist, and kind of the goal of an anesthesiologist on your day of surgery is to take one of the most stressful days in your life and turn it into a positive, gain the trust of the patient to, take over their bodily functions. And during COVID times, during 2020, 2021, I saw there was a lot of misinformation, and not only just misinformation on social media, which you'll hear a lot of different medical influencers talk about. It wasn't just social media misinformation. It was a lot of groupthink that went one certain way. And as a physician myself, and also a finance major, understanding kind of the dynamics of health and education and the business behind it, I didn't see a lot of individuals out there kind of calling out what's wrong and what's right, and what's trying to exploit patients and what's actually helping patients. And so as my social media persona or as I grew and matured as a person, as a father, like we talked about, I really had a passion almost for having people think a different way about certain topics. And it does cause a little bit more controversy, if that makes sense, on some of my social media posts. You'll see it from time to time. I'll post something that kind of goes against the grain, and that's not meant to, cheer one side or the other. It's really just to have people think about, hey, what's the opposite effect? Why is this issue coming to light? Even with the food that we eat every single day, is there a possibility that maybe some of the food that we eat is actually hurting us, even though it's advertised as all this great, life-saving, heart healthy type of food? And I took a real enjoyment in that, because I will tell you, Dinesh, Seema, there's so many people and patients and followers that message me and tell me that, hey, you made me think about this, or you made me go ask my doctor about that. And it wasn't just kind of the group think, which was, hey, do this, this, and this, and you'll be okay. I tried really hard, and still try really hard to bring a different perspective to all aspects of medicine, not just what you hear and see in the social media world or on TV and television. And so that has been a great passion of mine. But along with that, being a father, and now having that feeling, invincibility, the immortality that you have until you reach the age of like 30, that being kind of taken away, and my passion almost being shifted in a way to a more caretaking role. I have enjoyed that so much, and I love sharing that hey, it's possible to have a life inside of medicine. It's possible to be dual physician household and still enjoy different aspects of life, and the common pitfalls that come along with being a dual physician household. It's not all roses. It's not all butterflies. There's a lot of challenges that everybody faces. It doesn't matter where you are on the social media spectrum, or even just the life spectrum. And I have really enjoyed bringing that to light too, and kind of sharing some of the fallacies that are found in the day to day. So I've really taken a passion to those two. And then during football season, like you said, I do talk about the Ravens a lot too.
That's amazing. I love that you are unafraid to really present different sides of a topic where most people are, in the majority, a one way of thinking. I think that that's honestly what much of the world is missing is, well, let's look at this and see how is this helpful, or how else can we look at this to not make the other side wrong, but to take what we can from both sides and move forward in whatever way that looks best to you. And my question off of that is, my experience was being a parent in medicine. And I think this would be generally true for people in any ambitious profession. You mentioned, being a parent, being a dual physician co-parenting team. And oftentimes I feel like that piece of it is strongly encouraged to stay out of practice. Mm-hmm. But, the more and more we've incorporated it in, of course, I no longer practice, but it's actually become so much richer. And I thought I was a better provider. I believe I was a better provider. I know my husband is, with patients, because he takes those skills into the professional setting. But I was curious if you could talk more about that.
So as a resident, when you get into medical school, you are kind of, there's a carrot on a stick. You're trying to chase this goal of becoming the MD, becoming the practicing physicians, doing the surgeries, or taking care of patients in a certain way. And you're always kind of trying to catch up and keep your head above water. And unfortunately, today's day and age, we do not kind of value our physicians and our healthcare providers in general. We kind of just treat it as another job, when it's absolutely a different job from going and doing accounting, or going and doing finance, or going and doing engineering. Every day in and day out, you have stresses of people's lives in your hands. And those, even though it's a business, and that is not called out enough either, even though healthcare is a business, we tend to lose that. And as we come out of residency, many doctors, many first year doctors almost are defeated, and because they're defeated, they're still hopeful of becoming the physician, but that carries over into their day-to-day lives. And you see it all the time. You see residents graduating from residency, they're overweight, they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't have the will to start a family. Maybe they have a family and they're never home. They missed 3-4 years of their children's lives during residency. They were kind of a ghost presence at home. And we almost, as physicians and as attendings now, take that for granted. And we don't really give that support to physicians, to residents, to females in medicine, I mean, I have gone on my platform and kind of tried to push this, not push, but bring light to the idea that women in medicine it's a double standard. You know, they are expected to kind of do the home stuff and also do the work stuff. And
Yeah.
in doing the work stuff, I don't think a lot of males in the healthcare field understand the kind of trials and tribulations women go through in medicine as physicians. You know, even as the top of the top. I mean, I've interviewed some of the biggest neurosurgeons in the country right now, and you hear their day-to-day challenges and how they kind of deal with being almost not disrespected, but unconsciously or subconsciously approached in a different manner than their male counterparts. You know, they're kind of bred to be a certain type of persona, but unfortunately in medicine today, that persona is a male character type or male stereotype, whether it's being strong, affirm, making decisions, coming off a little bit confident. Those attributes are really attributed to men, and when women come off that way, they come off as, you know, she's the hard one to work with, she's the, you know, the B word, or she's too strong-willed, and you can kind of go from there what words come to mind when you think of a female context in that sense. And unfortunately there's not a lot of light shed on that, especially by male physicians. So I totally understand what you're saying, and I try to bring a little bit of perspective to that. That hey, there's a whole world outside of medicine. You know, your job is to take care of people, but if you don't take care of yourself first, and whatever that includes, whether that's health and fitness, whether that's hanging out with your family, taking care of your kids, raising your children, creating a household, whatever that other aspect of your life, that should be as important, if not more important, than your job as a physician. And unfortunately, I don't think that's taught in medical schools. I don't think that's taught in nursing schools. I don't think that's taught in the healthcare field in general. And then you end up with physician burnout. You end up with, unfortunately, a rise in suicide rates amongst physicians, a rise in abuse rates amongst physicians, and divorces. And so, if I could bring a little bit of light to that, a little bit of color to that thought process, that would be a win in my book.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked on the podcast about the difference between an or perspective and an and perspective, right? And I think all three of us are living and, you know, walking the walk of being or approaching our life from an and perspective. And you know, I'm willing to bet, because it's been true for me, and I'm willing to bet it's true for you, Zain, that when you leaned into these other aspects of your life, whether it's content creation, it is leaning into sort of shedding light on different aspects, your parenting, the fun, the joy that is so evident in your videos. At least for me, I became a better lawyer when I started to really pursue an identity that wasn't solely boxed in by my profession. And, you know, I want to unpack that a little bit. We walk around, we're a doctor, we're a lawyer. Those are really, you know, guardrails on our identity and what we're allowed to do, because we view everything out of the lens, right? Should a lawyer dress this way? Should a doctor drive this kind of car? Should we have this kind of phone case, for example, right? And those tend to be limitations that we place upon ourselves. And in those limitations, we sort of undercut our success in our respective professions. A lot of people think that we have to leave or walk away from being a lawyer or a doctor to do something else. But I found the absolute opposite to be true. I found that I become more efficient, more productive, more creative, more connected, and just overall more engaged, because I'm more fulfilled and satisfied. What would you add to that? I see you nodding your head, so I'm assuming that you agree, but what would you add to that to convince or to make the plea to people who are experiencing burnout or some sort of dissatisfaction that maybe the answer isn't to take something away that they feel is causing these things for them? The answer is probably to add something that allows them to reconnect with the humanity and the totality of who they are.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point, Dinesh. I think that a lot of the times when you get into certain professional fields, your entire identity becomes that field. And like you said, you kind of walk the walk and talk the talk of a certain archetype. And I think that is a detriment to society for the most part, especially in this new generation of social media and the new Gen Z and the next generation of kids that are coming along. They don't view that as a positive. They view more that your creativity, how you are as a person, your day to day, how you treat people, and even what you stand up for, those are very big pillars of how you identify yourself for the next generation. I think our generation is kind of caught in the middle between the baby boomers and the new generation that's coming up, and we're almost lost. We don't really have that self confidence to go out on a limb and try something new. And I'm not saying necessarily that has to be social media, but even a different sport, different type of cooking, a different habit or hobby outside of medicine, outside of law, outside of your professional life, because our time on this world is limited. It's not unlimited. And for the longest time, especially when you're pursuing graduate and postgraduate school studies, you kind of think that this is the end. This is the finish line. When you cross that, you've made it. And then you're left with this big empty hole in your heart or a hole in your stomach where you're like, how do I fill it? And I think going out on a limb and trying something new almost reinvigorates your sense of lust for life. Your vibrancy comes up from the inside, and it shows you who your real character is. And I'm a huge fan of that. I think every single physician, professional should have something outside of their professional life that they enjoy. It doesn't necessarily have to be social media. Like I said, I enjoy it, but I I think it's a huge detriment to society when your entire identity is kind of focused around your job only, and you're not really adding. Everybody listening to this podcast probably has so much more to add to the world and society in general. So I would absolutely encourage that, and hopefully with my videos, at least going out on a limb to do things that I wasn't comfortable with in the beginning. Going out on a limb and kind of becoming a little bit more comfortable with it might inspire the next, or at least my generation, to kind of do that as well.
Yeah.
I love that, Zain. And speaking of having passions and things outside of just medicine, you have a passion, as you mentioned and Dinesh said, it's medicine adjacent in that you have this deep passion, and I can see it on the screen, to combat medical misinformation. And you did say, I completely agree here. There's so many people out there who are on Instagram or whatever platform they are in healthcare, and they're influencing what people think, how they think. Talk to us about, what do you see as your responsibility as a medical influencer? And how can our audiences really discern for themselves where there's information that's more accurate versus what is, fluff?
Yeah, so I think when you see medical influencers or anybody on social media talking about a certain product or a certain service, if they haven't used it themselves and they can't vouch for it, you really can't trust them. I have seen so many medical creators vouch for certain supplement companies or certain facial beauty companies that they don't even try, they don't even use at home. And I know for a fact, because I know them as people, and they're all great people. But I think in today's day and age, there's a very big push to kind of almost sell everything. And I have really, every time I work with a company or even advertise for a company, I always try their products first, because I think that that's disingenuous to anybody who's following me. If I say, hey, I take this supplement, or I try this fruit, or I eat this fiber product, or whatever it is, I can vouch that it actually works. And today's day and age, the doctors or even any of the social media healthcare professionals tend to really put out there things that they don't use. And I think that's maybe the baseline litmus test on whether or not you should trust somebody or not trust somebody. It's because if you're not using the product yourself, or if you're not using the service yourself, you really can't sell it. Now, the other part of your question, when you're talking about medical misinformation out there, there is unfortunately, it's very it's dichotomous. There's a left side and the right side to kind of everything, and there's no real middle ground. And I think the majority of people, especially in this country, fall into the middle ground, but the loudest voices are on the sides, and those voices tend to cause the most controversy, but also amplify the most, and they're probably paid the most by their respective groups that support them or don't support them. And I think me, as a physician who kind of understands the basics of just general health, that's a big passion of mine. It's not necessarily the specifics. Hey, you need to take this medicine, or your metoprolol twice a day, or this and that. But just, hey, this is what your baseline diet should be. This is what you should think about every time you go to the grocery store, or whatever that is. I think I personally take that approach to disseminating information on social media that, hey, there should be a baseline that everybody should kind of understand, whether it's the GLP-1 agonist, what's the purpose of them? It's not, it's yes, to lose weight and get healthier, but what's the second step behind that? It's that, hey, you're actually getting healthier because you're eating less Dorito chips, or you're drinking less diet soda, or you're smoking less, or you're drinking less, or whatever it is. Let's extrapolate. Let's not try to sell you the Hims and Hers subscription just to solve all your problems. Let's try to extrapolate, hey, what is really going on here? It's probably has to do with what you're putting in your mouth every single day.
Mhm.
And that is something that if you understand, you can use that, and you can teach a person you can give a person a fish, right? And that's dinner for one night, but if you can teach them how to fish, that's for the rest of their lives. And I've kind of held on to that statement in my heart, because if I can just tell people, or even inspire people to think a little bit differently about the food, the exercise, the day-to-day, even their stresses in life, they can just think a little bit differently, we might be able to shift the general population away from this polarized society, which is like, hey, vaccines are right, hey, vaccines are going to kill you, and then it's like there's no middle ground in between at all. And you're like, come on, guys, we can have a nuanced discussion about what's going on. What are the business incentives for not only the vaccine makers, but also the back end incentives as well. And I like to bring a little bit of light to that area, and hopefully help the average patient, the average person, kind of understand there is a middle ground, and you can live in the middle ground. You don't have to be polarized. We don't have to be at war with each other all the time over every topic. There's not necessarily a right and wrong to every topic, but there is a gray area, and that gray area is where most of us, I think the majority of us reside, So that's kind of my role, I feel like, and I think I've carved that out a little bit in social media, to be the kind of the in between, see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I love that you gave this litmus test of, is the person using it? But I'll be honest, I think we're past that. I think that hurdle, I think people know, and they push things that they already using. So
Yeah.
I'll talk about a famous scientist from Stanford that uses AG1, for example, or someone else might say they're using Shilajit, or someone else might say the Oura Ring versus the Whoop, or vitamin C or turmeric or whatever, right? There are lots of different things that people say they're using: red light therapy, cold, this amount of protein, and all of that. So give us one more level, because there's only so much information someone can take, and I'm guilty of trying a lot of things. I like to try new things, but 9 out of 10 times I try it and I make my own decision that this is not worth it. It's not worth the cost. That like sleep patches, nose tape, mouth tape. There's so many things in this health and wellness industry, because we're all looking for a little bit of a hack, right? We're all looking for a little bit of a boost in performance. If I'm scrolling social media today and I come across something and someone's there telling me, someone I feel like I have a relationship with, and they're like, I take Shilajit, it's the only supplement I take, it's great. What is the next level of scrutiny in my algorithm? Do I go out and try it? Do I ask my doctor about it? Do I search reviews on Amazon? I don't know if I can trust those. Do I look for other influencers who are, paid pretty heavily to push this stuff? What is the next level in my algorithm before I actually ingest or spend my hard-earned money?
That's a great question, Dinesh. I think out off the bat, you should always, anytime you take any sort of supplement or you're adding some sort of bioactive material inside your body, check with a healthcare provider, because it's, for the majority of people, it's probably safe. But if you have a kidney disease, or if you have a heart disease and you can't take certain supplements, or you can't take certain products, your doctor, your nurse practitioner, your physician should know about it. And it's a pretty simple yes or no, you'll be fine or not. I think the next level to that is understanding kind of where that person is coming from. So if you, let's say the AG1 thing, and I'm not sponsored by AG1 or anything like that, but I have seen influencers who push it very, very, very hard. And if you kind of break down and you do a little bit of research in the AG1 space, you find out that AG1 is a little bit, misleading, in the sense that the majority of their proprietary blend is probably spinach. The rest of it is mixed with other greens, which are good for you. But so you have to take a little bit onus on yourself. I would take it two facets. One, do you fit in the same category as this influencer, or do you aspire to be like this influencer? If it's a beauty influencer, or if it's somebody who is a plastic surgeon who's advertising certain skincare products. Hey, is that person somebody you aspire to be like? Is that somebody who you aspire to look like? If that's the case, then take that product and do a little bit of research on the back end. And you don't necessarily have to go to the Amazon reviews, but if you just go to the Instagram page, you go to the TikTok page, you see a couple of comments that, hey, this really worked for me, or this is something that I like, or you see somebody sharing it, then you can kind of reinforce that, hey, maybe this cream or this serum does actually help with anti-aging or whatnot. But the other end of that is, they're like, I know who you're talking about out of Stanford. He is a machine, right? He lives by the code. Can you live by that code? I mean, that hack is not going to work for you. The cold showers and the hot sauna baths are not going to work for you if you don't bring the entire picture into mind, right? He's eating very clean. He's drinking. He's not drinking alcohol. He's not smoking cigarettes. He's not hanging out with his friends. So you have to kind of look at the whole picture. Don't just, there's no easy hacks out there. There's no silver bullet. There's no magical pill that you can take that's going to fix everything. But if you have the base level knowledge that, whatever it is, diet, exercise, day-to-day life, what's good, what's bad. If you have that base level of knowledge, you can kind of picture yourself in that position or not. And I think that's the next iteration of marketing in general. Before it was the Hollywood stars, like if Brad Pitt said he used this, I'm going to use it. There's no way I'm not going to use it, because he's the guy I look up to. But in today's day and age where information is so easily, readily accessible, you can kind of figure out as a patient, as a Instagram follower, as someone on social media, hey, do I fit into this picture? Am I in this lifestyle? Am I trying to be not necessarily like the influencer, but am I trying to be a CrossFit athlete, or am I trying to be a heavy weightlifter? Or am I trying to have a six pack? Because if you if you want to do that, it's a giant commitment. It's not just one silver bullet. Even though that's how most products are advertised, it's never just one. You have to embrace the entire lifestyle. And I think that's kind of the next iteration of where marketing in general is going to go. It's going to be not necessarily selling a product, but almost, hey, do you want this lifestyle?
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great. Really well said, by the way. In fact, that's the algorithm I kind of fell on. Like, there's new types of proteins, there's new bars, all sorts of things. And I always say to myself, if I went back to one level foundational, a first principle, like let's just say protein, are you getting enough protein? Am I eating enough protein to start with? Am I even getting within 50% of my goals before I spend my hard-earned money on the latest designer protein? So I think that's great. I want to ask you to finish a question or a statement as we transition right here. And I think you know exactly what it is because I just put it on my Instagram and I thought it was such a great, great framing of what you shared. Medicine is hard. Being a father is?
Harder.
Why do you say that?
It's purpose. I mean, as much as I enjoy medicine, I had never felt that a switch in my heart turned on the way I felt when my son was born. I never felt that I cared for something in this world that I would give my life for. I enjoy medicine. I enjoy the day in and day out of taking care of patients in their most stressful times. But I'll be honest with you, Dinesh and Seema, there was never a switch on me that said, hey, I would swap places with that person on that operating table. When my son was born, I said that was the first feeling in my heart that I said, or that I felt, that, hey, I would take a bullet for him. I would switch places with him. If he, God forbid, had some sort of terminal cancer, I would swap in a heartbeat. If there was something bad happening to him, I wish I could take that pain away and put it inside myself. I never had that feeling. And medicine is hard in the traditional sense. Being a father, being able to set an example, but also set boundaries, inspire, but not become too harsh of a critic, allow my son to fulfill his maximum potential without stressing him out too much in today's day and age. Those are such nuanced, difficult decisions day in and day out that you don't even know if you did the right thing until 3, 5, 7 years later. Even as simple as, hey, how can I take the ultra processed foods out of his diet when he is bombarded day in and day out with advertisements for Cheerios or Fruit Loops or whatever it is, or his friends are eating it? How do you navigate that? And that is a challenge that I never faced. I don't think I ever faced him. I mean, becoming a doctor was hard, but there was a script, there's a, hey, do this, study this, take this test, do this tutoring, and you're going to get there. I never kind of had that kind of feeling in my heart until my son was born. So I think the challenge of being a father is something that I actually love, and it's a passion of mine. I enjoy medicine, but I would not say I would trade places with a patient in a second. But for my son, I would do it in a heartbeat. I wouldn't even think about it, like that story of that poor kid that fell out of the boat.
Yeah.
And we were talking about it this weekend, my wife and my sister and her husband. And, in that moment, I was like, that could have been certain death for that father. If you jump out of a cruise ship while the motors or the big turbines are running, I mean, you would be instant. But he made that decision in a split. And I don't know the background of the story. I just know a little bit of the headlines. But
Yeah.
I thought about, hey, would I do that? And, initially I was like, man, I'd be a little bit scared of my life. But then, after thinking about it for 30 seconds, I said, I probably would have jumped straight out too. I wouldn't even hesitate. It would have been split second. I'm out that window as well to save my son. And that feeling, I don't think comes naturally unless, naturally in medicine, but it does come in being a parent. And so I love it. I absolutely love it. It's been the greatest challenge of my life. And it's actually the most inspiring challenge of my life. And day in and day out, it's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. I love that very authentic and vulnerable share, because I think the challenge becomes, saying, Dinesh has said this before. I probably won't say it as eloquently as he, but something's hard for some things are harder, some things are easier. And I think we can all agree that parenting brings out a unique type of challenge, because there's a spiritual contract that I believe we kind of enter into, right? When we birth a child, it goes beyond a physical relationship of this is my offspring genetically. So whether you are an adoptive parent, or a whatever, a traditional type, it does tug at you differently. But I also see a lot of, parenting is so hard, and therefore I'm going to drink my glass of wine, and therefore I'm going to doom scroll till 5 a.m. or 3 a.m, and therefore it's okay that I flip out at my kid because it's just so hard and they don't get it, or they're spoiled, right? That's another one. So what would you say to parents who really are navigating? And I want to acknowledge too, this generation of parents, we are up against something that's unprecedented, which makes it uniquely challenging. The amount of ultra processed foods, the type of technology that we have. I feel like there's a slow degradation in the family fiber. Right? Families who sit down to eat a clean, nutritious meal at dinner consistently, maybe not every day, but more often than not, it's disappeared almost. And we're just up against so many unknowns. So what would you say to parents who find themselves in similar positions? We're not faulting, we're not blaming. Lord knows I've been there. But that only stops when you start to take responsibility and start to approach it differently. So just curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Seema. I think our generation is in a very difficult position. Our parents' generation had very traditional family structure. They had nothing was questioned. The what was right was right, what was wrong. If your parents got mad at you, that was okay. It was okay by society. How they treated boys versus girls. It was a different time, And I'm the son of an immigrant. I'm not sure if you guys are, but when our parents came over here, they were leaving their country. They were starting brand new. They didn't have anything. They didn't have a family structure, whatever it was. They did the best that they could. But that, unbeknownst to our generation, I'm a millennial, so our generation, we had a lot of childhood trauma from the way that previously, how, the past 1800, 1900 years, how children were raised. And so the difference in our parenting styles is, I think, for our generation, is to kind of heal the trauma from our parents' generation, but also not continue it on to our kids. And unfortunately, that leaves a lot of people, like you said, doom scrolling, saying it's too hard, saying it's not possible to do. And I think that challenge is ever present in day-to-day activities. And unfortunately for our generation, there's not only the trauma from our parents' generation, but there's the amount of social tragedies we've kind of gone through as a country in the United States. I mean, not going all the way back to 9/11, to COVID, to the world wars, to everything else going on. There's so much social, political stresses on our generation as well, and trying to navigate that. Plus, this new age of social media, our kids are going to be on their phones. They're going to have AI assistants years before we even had the internet. So they're going to have all this information that's going to be in front of their faces. It is challenging. I fully acknowledge that. I think it's probably the hardest generation to parent, or the hardest generation as parents, is this generation that we are going through right now. And I do not fault any parent out there who gets upset, who has frustration, who kind of loses their cool, because there's just so much going on. There's just so much society pressure. There's just so much anxiety that permeates through our generation. And unfortunately, I don't know if I have the best answer for it, but I think if you show up, and there's a statistic, one of my child psychiatrist friends told me that if you show up 30%, if the child has a parent present for 30% of their time during the day. Now, let's say you have 10 hours during the day. If for 3 hours a day, if they have a positive parental influence or experience, they will be okay. And so I try to model that a lot, especially on the weekends when our son's home for the full day. Hey, let's get him 3 good hours of whatever it is, just presence, playing with him, doing activities, even learning, or just eating, like you said. Let's get 3 solid hours of presence. And if I can hit that baseline, then everything on top of that is just a cherry on top, and he'll be better for it in the long run. But that's kind of the model that I try to keep inside of me, because I don't see him in the morning. I'm out the door before he even wakes up. And in the afternoons, I'm full day of work and I'm exhausted when I get home, and then it's feeding time, brush your teeth and whatever. But those 3 hours, if those 3 hours before he goes to sleep from when I get home, if I can do like 90 minutes of it, 90 minutes of it as a positive reinforcement to him, that's kind of what I shoot for. And I on my social media as well, I try to emphasize that, hey, you don't have to do everything all the time at once. Just find a couple things that you can hold on to as core values, whether it's with your diet or exercise or with your children. Just hold on that little core bit and just do that over and over again. So it reinforces in your son's or your daughter's mind that, hey, that's my support system. I can, in the world where there's going to be even more chaos with AI and robots and things in our lives that are going to change, rapidly in the next decade, those kids can just hold on to, hey, dad or mom, I know that they got my back. That probably will set them up for success in the future. And that's kind of the best advice that I can give, but I'm still learning as it goes too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I mean, all of that is so aligned with the way I think. And, going back to the cruise ship thing, we were talking about it with our friends over the holiday weekend. And I'll be honest, we were on a Disney cruise about 3 months ago, and we kind of know exactly what boat and where the window was and all that stuff, and looking out and seeing what that water looks like. I'll tell you, it's scary to think about, but I'll confess, I've started thinking about it when I work out. Because if you're ever in that position to jump 40 feet into the ocean, I'm not talking about a lake or a pool, 40 feet, and trying to reach a child who doesn't know how to swim, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
That's a tall order. And I'd hate for myself to think that I'm in the water, I'm treading water for 20 minutes, and I'm tired at that point. Right. So that was, really eye opening for, how much a child can impact the way you look at life. We've never done this before, but I'm going to interview you now, and I'm going to give you a choice of questions. Okay. Cool. You get to pick which one you want to answer. And one's going to be controversial. One's not. One's going to be not as controversial. So your wife's a physician, you're doing the content thing, you're on YouTube, you've got a podcast, you're on Snapchat where you post your fitness content, you're on Instagram, you're on TikTok, you're a practicing anesthesiologist. And without giving away too much, I know you're working on other, I'll just call them collaborations and things like that, where things are in motion, big things are in motion for you. The first question is, share with us how you get all this stuff done. Is there some secret? Is there some special assistant you have? Is it just, and I know this is not true, but is it just that you're living this glamorous life and your wife is stuck at home doing all the dishes and laundry? I know that's not true, but I want to give the full array. That's the first question. The second question, and you can get to choose or you can answer both, is tell us something about parenting that everyone else or a majority of other people disagree with you on. but you know in your heart of hearts, in your core, that this is the right thing for you, your family, and your kid, and you don't care what other people's opinions are on this aspect of parenting.
Yeah. I'll do both.
Woo!
Um, the it's not glamorous. I promise you, it looks glamorous on social media, but I do everything I post, I do myself. So I don't have a team, I don't have an editor, I don't have somebody who does kind of the back end legwork for me, somebody who messages or reaches out. Everything, every partnership, every video that I post, any comment or captions, the in the video or underneath the video, that's all me. So it takes a lot of planning almost, and in the spare time that I have. So I'll give you a little example. We both work. My wife is not at home. She works harder than I do, and she works much crazier hours than I do. But the time that we have after, when we get home, we do all the house stuff, take care of the kid, feed, dinner, brush our teeth, get ready for bed, get him to bed. Then my wife goes to bed, and then I have about an hour between 10 and 11 where I try to edit the videos, post the social media content, and schedule all the posts for the next day. And so I try to fit it in that little time window as much as I can. I don't You'll see social media creators who, especially healthcare creators, who post all the time, and typically they have a team that's doing it on the back end for them. I don't have that. I just didn't want anything to go out there that represented me that wasn't accurate to who I was as a person. I try to be as authentic as I can in that instance. Another part of this where I think a lot of so the second part of your question, what do I think about parenting that might be a little controversial? So I have fully embraced, I think a lot of parents still are hesitant to this, but I fully embraced teaching my kid about artificial intelligence and what the ramifications are going to be for the next generation. And so I've already he has a relationship with chat on Chat GPT, and he talks to her at night, and we do story time, and we do idea creating, and we make videos, and we make images at night before we go to sleep, just to help him kind of inspire his creativity. So he comes up with an idea where he talks about, I want Captain America, a dinosaur fighting on a planet with, giant volcanoes. And I'm like, all right, let's generate the image. And then for the story, we're going to use this image and we're going to talk about it. And sometimes we even ask chat to, hey, give us the background of the story for story time. So they can kind of set the baseline or the ground for the story itself. And I think a lot of parents, and I don't blame them, tend to shy away from technology because of what the previous norms were. Stay away from the TV screen, don't sit too close to the TV screen, stay off your phone. Unfortunately, Dinesh, I think that the future for these kids is not going to be that way. There's just no way I can see in the future they don't have a little AI bot or a phone or something that answers every single question that they have about anything, whether it's religion, whether politics, whether it's sports teams, or just stories in general. Their imaginations are going to be the only limiting power to how far they can take this planet, our species, or whatnot, because it will unleash an entire generation of kids, not necessarily just in the United States, but all over the world. I mean, you're going to have Harvard level education at the fingertips of kids in Uganda or kids in Sri Lanka or kids in China. And there's going to be this unleashed potential and I think in the next 10, 20 years for humanity in general. And so I almost want to position my son in a way that he understands it at a very young age, what the capabilities are, not just of a computer, not just of a phone, but just of creative thinking. And so I don't know if it's right or wrong, and it's kind of a test case, and I'll report back to you in 8-10 years if he becomes a degenerate AI user or not. But I'm hoping that if I can teach him a little bit about the fundamentals of what the future of technology is going to be, maybe he can kind of position himself to be a little bit better than his peers. So I don't know if that's controversial or not, but that's kind of my take.
No, it's great. It's not controversial with me because I have a very similar philosophy. When it comes to things like alcohol, drinking and driving, cigarettes, social media, your phone, selfies, AI, any of those things, they're tools, they're out there, right? And I got a question a lot, like, hey, you're on social media, you're showing your kids are on the video. Aren't you worried about, being hacked? Are you worried about their identity being stolen and all that stuff? And I had to sit there and answer these questions for myself. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Is it sort of like some midlife crisis, or some dopamine hit for some celebrity? I want validation that, whatever it is. And in those searching, and the comment I want to make is that I concluded that deep underlying within me was a philosophy that stems in responsibility.
Yeah.
And so I try to expose my kids to the things I know they will have access to, but I won't be able to control, so they can responsibly use them, whether it's alcohol, driving, smoking, social media, YouTube, whatever it is. Um, you know, when I take a video of my kid playing soccer, right? We review it together and say, "Hey, should I post that? Should I not post that?"
I love
He's like,
that.
"No, don't show that I didn't make the kick. People will think I suck." Like, no, no, it's okay to show that you didn't make it, and then we'll show that you did make it, right?
I
It
love it.
shows both sides of it. And so ultimately, what you're doing with AI is you're training him how to use it responsibly, and that also will go into like, do I use this to cheat or not? I know it can do it for me, but it's better if I do it myself, right? And you'll get to those lessons. So I totally agree that exposing them to things that you're not going to be there to control
Yeah.
all the time
Yeah.
is arming them with the
Mhm.
ability to self-regulate and use these tools for themselves. So I mean, hats off to you. I'll take my hat off. So hats off to you. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Anything in life is a weapon or a tool, and you
Yeah.
decide. And I think that there's a lot of unknowns with the AI, and I think there's a lot of understandable fear. I know you recently started talking about AI and what that looks like for us as providers with patient care,
Yeah.
particularly with rare diseases and
Yeah.
things like that. And there's a lot of gray, and I think that there's just so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
That it's difficult to really make a case for either. So I love that you really, with what I love about your posts is you present something and then you say, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
And why I like that is, again, kind of alluding to what Dinesh said, you're not making it wrong. Because we really don't know. And so, which leads me to my question, how do you see AI as really coming into play for anesthesiology? We're already seeing it with radiology in order to, they're quickly diagnosing different things. But how can that start to affect anesthesia? Other areas of medicine like critical care. Thoughts?
Yeah. No, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't know if we can cover all of them in AI, but I mean, overarching, it's coming one way or another. The biggest costs, or sorry, one of the biggest costs to our national debt is healthcare, and that's about $2 trillion a year. And they are investing upwards of 10 trillion in the next 10 years on these AI data centers, on AI in general. And the thought process behind it is to increase productivity. However, in my mind, hospitals, insurance companies are just like Uber in the sense that if they could eliminate the driver, they would do it in a heartbeat. They can't do it right now. The physical tech is not there. The robotics are not there. The self-driving cars are not there. But AI is coming one way or another because it's cheap in the long run. It's going to be cheaper than human capital to do anything, not necessarily just in medicine, but any sort of procedural based fields in across the board. Now, whether that happens in the first decade or the next in 20 years, it's going to happen one way or another. In medicine, we're a little bit more sheltered in the sense that there's a lot of laws and legislation and just a trust factor that protects us in a sense from just intrusion by artificial intelligence immediately. But as a general rule of thumb, in the beginning, it's going to be more of an assistant. Now, as an anesthesiologist, every single morning, I have to look up my patients and see what are their medical problems, what are their past surgeries, what medications have they done well with, what have they done bad with, what are their heart conditions, how will they do during surgery, and I have to kind of risk stratify the morning of, hey, how serious of a threat to their life is the surgery the morning of surgery. In my mind, if there was an AI assistant that could just do a lot of the researching and the legwork for me and present me with, hey, this is Mr. Jane Smith. He has this condition, this condition, this condition. He's done previously well with this anesthetic versus this anesthetic. He has had blood loss in this situation, not that situation. And his heart function is good. He doesn't smoke, blah, 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 blah. If I have some sort of AI assistant, AI tool that does that end for me, that would make my life a lot more I wouldn't say easier, but a lot more streamlined to take care of the patient themselves instead of doing paperwork. Now, along the lines of paperwork, a lot of the issues in medicine, why people are so dissatisfied as being doctors, is because 80% of the time we do documentation, 20%, maybe 10% of the time we actually take care of the patient. When you go to a doctor's appointment, you spend 7 minutes with your physician. They spend 13 or 15 minutes on the back end charting the entire visit. There's already AI bots out there that you take into the physician room with you. At this point, they're testing it here at UPMC and over in California and other places. You take it into the patient room, you just have your regular conversation, you talk about your physical exam, you walk out of there, you tell the AI assistant to, hey, generate me a level 3 note for this visit. It generates it for you. It cuts out all the fluff, everything else you talked about. That saves, if you just think about it, Seema, that could save 10 minutes per patient per day. Let's say you say 20 patients a day. That's 200 minutes of your time that it could potentially save every single day. So you're looking at 3.5 hours of extra time you could spend with a patient, or you could do other things outside of the hospital. So I think there's a lot of wide variety of ways AI will be implemented to make our lives easier. So as physicians in this generation, I think it's probably the best time to be a doctor for the next decade or two. It's going to take a lot of the scut work, a lot of the BS out of medicine, and let you focus on your patients, which is going to be awesome. Now, 20 years from now, 15 years from now, going into certain medical fields, I think is going to be very stressful for a lot of aspiring doctors, and anybody who's listening to this podcast wanting to become a family physician or an internal medicine doctor, a radiologist, or an infectious disease doctor. Unless you have physical, skills that you can do on a patient, I think your jobs are in jeopardy for the next generation. I think our generation, they're totally fine. I don't think it's going to change at all. But I think in 20 years, 15, 20 years, a lot more people are going to start trusting Gemini or ChatGPT to diagnose their cough, their cold. A lot more hospitals are going to use ChatGPT to figure out which bug is causing this kind of infection in this area and which antibiotic works better, and therefore thus decreasing the need for infectious disease doctors or even radiologists. There's such a dearth of radiologists right now that they send scans overseas to Australia to be read at night because there's just not enough radiologists to read CAT scans or MRIs or X-rays. How soon until we start trusting the robots to read it at night? If they're already assisting in that process, you don't have enough radiologists, and radiologists cost a lot in general to employ in their diagnostics and their setups and all that stuff. How long until they become replaced at nighttime by a AI script that pushes it to the ER doctor to kind of review? You know what I mean? So you can see that slippery slope kind of manifesting itself slowly. Now it's not, even ChatGPT right now is not 100% accurate. It's probably in the 90s or 85, 90%. It's going to take time to get to that sixth derivation of accuracy. But that being said, it's coming. There's just so much money being invested in this new wave of the internet, as they say. It's going to affect all aspects of life, and physicians that are not in hospital systems and insurance companies out there that are not positioning themselves to take advantage of this are going to be left out as losers in the long run, I think, is my opinion. But in the short term, I think as I said, any doctor who's a doctor now, I can almost guarantee you your life is going to be better in 3 to 5 years from now, as far as your home life balance, the more time you have with patients and your ability to do what you love. Robotic fields and surgical fields, I think that's long time from now, and probably not in our lifetimes. Maybe in our end of our lifetimes where robots do our surgeries, but not anytime soon, as they can barely, pick up a cup off of a table. So I don't think that's happening anytime soon. But I think those people, those kids, that younger generation that can take advantage of the artificial intelligence, they're going to be way better at life than us.
One thing that came to mind for me was AI, yes, but you said something that really caught my ear. I'm still thinking about it. You said it at the beginning of the episode, which is your job as the anesthesiologist is to make somebody who's having one of the scariest days of their lives and make it more comfortable, right? There is an element of trust. So regardless of what you do in life, whether you're in medicine or not, there is a component of how do we build trust quickly? So just before I let Dinesh take this and lead us into our wrap up, what are some tips that you would say are helpful that AI can't do, right? You can't replace that human connection. How do we build trust?
I think one, for me, myself, human touch. I don't think our generation is used to, and especially anybody in humanity right now is used to embracing or feeling that dopamine release from human touch. I think it's so important, especially in medicine, but just in general life. Human touch is very important, and especially with especially with a loving touch and the loving way you say things and the care that you kind of exude. AI is really good at answering questions and talking, but there's a robotic component to it. And I think for us as humans, our humanity is what makes us, who we are as people and what we care about and what we emphasize on a day to day. I think for as an anesthesiologist, coming down to the level and recognizing, for me, and this is, I can only speak to myself as a physician or as an anesthesiologist, but the morning of surgery, it's very, for us in the hospital, it's another day at work. And unfortunately, for whoever we're taking care of that day, whether it's for an emergency surgery or they just have a common cold, it's one of the worst days of their lives, and most people don't, most medical practitioners, but people in general don't tend to almost realize that, if that makes sense. They don't tend to come down to that level. When you run into somebody at the grocery store and someone cuts you off and you're like, hey, screw that guy, you don't know if that person's going through the worst day of their life. You don't know if they just had a bad breakup or they had, financial difficulties or their son got diagnosed with cancer or something crazy. You have no idea. You're just caught up in your own world. And unfortunately, for me, I think that's a circumstance of the society that we live in, that's always on the go, get as much done. You're not doing enough. You're not worthy. You're not good enough. And because that manifests in, hey, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to get there. I got to get this done. And it adds a level of anxiety and stress that maybe our parents or our parents' parents didn't have. And social media only amplifies that hatred, that fume, that fire, that hey, you're wrong or you're right or this and that. And the humanity part of it gets lost in the shuffle a lot of the times. I mean, we see it just in our day to day in the entire world. I mean, you see people starving for food, and it doesn't really trigger anything inside of us because we can go and turn the tap on and get unlimited water, and unfortunately, we're disconnected from our humanity. And I don't know how to fix that other than try to bring people back to the middle, and like you asked me earlier, what's my goal for doing all this? I see a polarized society, not just in medicine, but as a physician, I can kind of relate to both sides of our society. I see it polarized, and I don't see a lot of people reaching over to the other side and saying, hey, we can kind of fix this, or we can kind of come back to the middle. And as my role in society grows as an influencer or whatever you would say, I think that's a core principle of mine, even with AI, even with all these other things going on. Hey, remember our humanity. We all bleed the same. We all breathe the same. We all, have the same characteristics under our skin color. Let's not forget our humanity as people. And I think that's very important. Seema. I don't know the best way to do it aside from what I'm doing right now, to just allow, even in my comments section, to allow people to have conversations with folks that they vehemently disagree with, vehemently like, hey, this is wrong or this is right. But just being able to have that conversation breaks that barrier that, hey, you're unapproachable. You're a left-wing extremist. I'm just never going to relate to you. Or you're a right-wing extremist. I'm just never going to relate to you. But in reality, 95% of all of our beliefs are probably the same. They're probably the same. And if I can bring that out in my lifetime, maybe change the course of, my 1 million or 2 million followers, just to bring them a little bit closer to each other, so there's less hate and less anger in this world. And I feel like I will have had a successful social media career.
Beautifully said.
I think you're already there. I think you're doing exactly that. You're giving a voice to a lot of topics and really trying to educate from a place of empathy and compassion. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. So we're so glad to have you here. I can tell you that you're welcome back anytime. We'll maybe do one of those 3-hour-long episodes that those Stanford professors do, and I'm sure it'll be amazing. All right. So we live in a world of instant gratification. We all know that. We're not hiding from it. We're not telling people that you only have to be sort of like a sadhu and delay gratification. Tell us something without a doubt, that if someone listened to this episode and went off and said, you know what, I'm going to do what Dr. Zain Hasan said to me today, and it'll change my life in short order. I'll feel the benefits. What would that be?
Short order. Let's see. Get enough water. I think as simple as that sounds, we don't drink enough pure water. We drink a lot of sodas, drinks, juices, all those kind of things. But I think deep down inside, we really forget as human beings that, 80-90% of our body is actually water. Eat, drink, and sleep correctly. I think if you just do those 3 basics, I think a lot of problems in your life will self-select themselves out. If you just kind of boil it down to the simple basics and build yourself up. One more, Dinesh. I didn't mention this, but if you are really trying to change your health, if you're really trying to just restart your health and you're lost and you have back pains, stomach aches, whatever it is, try the elimination diet. I used it myself to figure out what my body responded to and didn't respond to. And this is controversial, but I did one of those allergy tests to find out which foods that I was a little bit more sensitive to. Try the elimination diet. If you don't know about it, essentially you boil your diet down to just something very basic, similar for a week, and then you add on different food groups, and you will find out every person reacts a little bit differently, even to milk, even to ice cream, yogurt, cheese, or whatever it is, sugar, fibrous foods. Try the elimination diet. It was absolutely game changing for me to add a certain food group, whether it was chicken or beef or salmon or whatever it was, to figure out, hey, my body feels a lot better if I have salmon at nighttime. The next day I have way more energy than if I have ground beef. If I eat something fatty versus fried, if I have something baked versus not. And try that. I guarantee you, if you just stick to it for 2 weeks, just Google or look up what the elimination diet is. And if you just try that, you essentially break it down, you build it up slowly, you could potentially change the way you feel day in and day out. Your body might function differently. You might have less pain, less sluggish feeling. Just try it. That would be my advice. Try the elimination diet. Obviously, check with your physician first. Some people can't do that, but try the elimination diet. It was a game changer for me, and that's how I lost the weight that I lost. In conjunction, I tried the allergy test, but I wouldn't. That doesn't really have any scientific backing, but it was just a nice little starting point for myself.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know I've played around with a little bit, some version of that, and it was eye-opening for me. So all good tips as always. And of course, this is not advice. This is just take it as is and use it wisely, listeners. One of my favorite parts of the show is Ask It Forward. So listeners, if you're new to Happy and Human, thank you for sticking with us to the end of the episode. Welcome. We hope you come back. But the previous guest has left a question for Dr. Zain Hasan. And then without knowing who the next guest is, when we're going to record, what we're going to talk about, he's just going to channel a question through the universe and ask it of the next guest, and they get to continue it forward. So this is from actually a colleague of ours, Dr. Ricky Singh. He is a spine specialist out of Cornell. And his question to you is, what do you want your body to do in 10 years?
It's a great question. I want it to be as, let me pick the right word. I want it to be as fluid as it possibly can. And what I mean by fluid is that there aren't any, and nothing slows it down to the point where it causes me not only discomfort, but doesn't let me achieve what I want to achieve. So I want it to be as optimized as it can at that state. And the only way I know that I can do that is to take care of itself right now. So 10 years from now, when I get to that point, it's as functional as it possibly can be. So I don't know if that's the best answer to it. I want it to be as fluid as, not necessarily as strong, or don't have to have a six pack or any of that kind of stuff, but just be fluid. When I reach my late 40s, I want it to be fluid. I don't want it to be stuck.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer. And I think it's a question that, if we look to where we want to get to, then quite often the what do I do now answers itself. So I really loved that question, and I loved your answer, because the listeners can even easily take that and say, okay, what does that mean for me? Right? What would be your question that you would leave for the next guest?
Yeah, I think, so Seema, when I was applying to residency, when I was in medical school, it was probably the most anxious part of my life that I've been through. Not knowing the future, not knowing how I was going to do, not knowing how I was going to end up. I asked a lot of people this question, but if you could go back to the point at which you had the most anxiety in your early 20s, whether it's for a professional relationship, whatever it is, if you can go back to yourself 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and give yourself some advice, what would it be in your early 20s, now being 10, 20 years later? What would you tell yourself to give yourself the confidence that it's going to be okay?
Great question.
I love it. That's a fantastic question. And listeners, we always encourage you to also think about these questions and answer them, and tune in next time for our guest's answer. But in the meantime, before we let Dr. Zain share where you can connect with him on his podcast or his YouTube, we like to give our guests the opportunity to share an organization that's near and dear to their heart, so that we can make a contribution on behalf of them, and in a way to say thank you and to spread the impact of our podcast. So Dr. Zain, do you have an organization that we can contribute to on your behalf?
Yeah, so it might be might be a little controversial in today's day and age, but I work with the World Health Organization, and they do a lot of positive impact across the world. They've caught a lot of negative rap recently, but if you can, they do a lot for the children and children's hunger around the world. And like I talked about earlier, I think sometimes we get disconnected from the stripes of a lot of human beings across this globe that don't get enough food or don't get enough water. So any sort of donation toward helping children, and like we talked about earlier, Seema, since I have my son, any donation toward children's food, children's hunger would be my wish.
Yeah.
Terrific. Will do.
I'm still thinking about the kids, and we had really terrible floods here in Texas. So my mind just briefly went to all of those families who have faced some challenges as well. So listeners, just take a moment, see what life is offering you, and there's always room for gratitude there. Okay, so Zain, where can our listeners find you? Tell us where they can connect. What are you up to that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Just Google me. It's Dr. Zain Hasan on most platforms, except for TikTok because I can't change my username. But if you search Dr. Zain Hasan, it should pop up on Instagram, YouTube. I also have a podcast, which I need to have you guys both on. It's just starting, so it's not nearly as polished as this one. But Dr. Zain Hasan on most, if not all, platforms. Exciting projects coming up, including potentially some large scale audience viewable not podcasts but episodes, if that makes sense. So a lot of cool things coming up. Just keep an eye out on your television screens if I show up, and if you can just like and share.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're so excited you could finally make it on.
Thank you. It's been awesome.